Hello there, and welcome to this video I'm doing today. I am reviewing the book How to Have a Beautiful Mind by Edward De Bono. And I am very happy to do this today. Edward De Bono, I discovered him when I was probably still in my teens. And bear in mind I'm turning 42 this year. That's quite a while ago. The story goes that my father, he read a lot. He had a huge collection of books, and I just hang out in the room where all the books were from time to time, and look at all these fascinating books from the 1970s and so on. And Edward De Bono's books stuck out at me. Books like Water Logic, Lateral Thinking, and so on. And these were the days before. There was going to be a good 15 years before I'd even hear about Wayne Dyer, Abraham Hicks, Marianne Williamson. This was before all of that. Edward De Bono. And I was really captured by the writing of this man, who could convey in words, who could capture in words things that you've thought a thousand times, but you couldn't put into words yourself. And it was so poetic and beautiful to come across that. And so, well, I should really show you the book here. This is it, How to Have a Beautiful Mind by Edward De Bono. That's it right there. He is probably he's about to turn 90. He's still with us, Edward De Bono. He's a Brit like me, but he's an old school Brit. And I don't talk like an old school Brit, but he does. When he does his presentations, he'll sit there with an overhead projector and the rolls of paper, as it were, and he'll be just sketching away as he's talking. And I'm also glad to be talking about him today because he's not really crossed over so well into the social media world. There's an Instagram account for his institution, a few things on there. He's on Facebook, but not to the extent of someone like Brendan Burchard and Gary Vee and all these other people that are well attuned to how we engage with information these days. So I'm glad to be doing this. So here we are. We're, depending on your outlook on things, we're still in quarantine or we're not. Okay, I'm in the we still are camp. Serendipity is interesting, isn't it? Because I often ask myself, well, why do I choose to do a certain book at a certain time? This book is basically about getting past the battle of argument, the needing to be right, the win-lose dynamic of conversations, of meetings, of decision-making. As I said, Edward De Bono, he's famous for, I think he pretty much coined the term lateral thinking. Lateral thinking is the opposite of vertical thinking. Vertical thinking is, I have a problem, I have a solution, and the two of them are kind of connected. And that really doesn't yield very interesting things. Lateral thinking, lateral creative solutions, that's what's created all of the interesting things that you know about. Humor is lateral thinking. Lateral thinking is something where you might not have been the one to think of it or arrive at it, but as soon as it's explained to you, it's completely obvious. That's lateral thinking, okay? He wrote a book. I'll get onto this book in a moment, but I'm very enthused to talk about the author just for a minute or so more. He wrote a book called The Code. Yes, I think it's called The Code Book. And if you can imagine this is going to sound quite clinical, but each chapter of that book is a series of codes, like, for example, things that come up in conversation. Code 6/2 might be, I've listened to what you said, but I don't want to talk about it right now, but I'd happy to later on. So the idea is you just say 6/2. Now, I would read that from time to time and think, well, how would that ever catch on? It's a great idea, but how would it catch on, you know? And the only way it would catch on is by everyone in the world reading that book, which would never happen. But I did find it very, very interesting. Anyway, How to Have a Beautiful Mind by Edward De Bono. Here we go. So the gist of this book is, as I say, about that battle of argument and how to educate your mind to dissipate it. Okay. The example he gives of a beautiful mind, or the analogy he draws from, he says, let's say, and remember, this is a 70-year-old man, British man talking. So just to explain the analogy, he says, let's say you've got a beautiful woman at a party who's made herself look elegant and beautiful and so on, but people are not talking to her. And he says, let's say you've got a not particularly attractive man, ugly man, I think he says, and yet people are enthused in talking to him. So he's what he's trying to say there is he's conveying there is a beauty. He's conveying there is a beauty, and one can make oneself look how we like, however we wish, but there is a beauty beyond that we connect with, which is very obvious now you think about it. But this book is about the realm of possibilities. It's the realm of open-ended solutions. It's about alternatives, okay? It's about transforming conversation to create open solutions. So, this is a very intellectual book. I can't talk about every chapter in this book because it would just be dry, tiring. Okay, so I'm going to take this in quite an unorthodox way. I'm going to group chapters together. I'm going to mention things that might sort of flick on a light for right now. Okay, so let me get out the gate and group a bunch of chapters together. The first chapters I'm going to talk about are the ones on agreeing and disagreeing, about emotions and feeling. Because when I was reading it, it's like there's a big similarity between the realm of agreeing and disagreeing. So what he's talking about here is he's recommending not to agree or disagree for its sake alone. You know, some people do that. They'll just disagree for the sake of it, or just disagree so that they can feel significant and so on. He's talking about the importance of acknowledging someone's experience. Why is this good to know right now? Because I mean, look, if we're on Facebook right now, the world of Facebook in the last 2-3 weeks has been a weird one, hasn't it? Because people share their opinion on life right now, specifically right now, and it's like dropping a bomb every time. And we're not, in one respect, well, social media is great because you get to have to share your opinion freely. On the other hand, it really shows me how we're not as a society very well educated in how to agree and disagree with each other respectfully and certainly in an open, exploratory way. So he's talking about the need to not have to be right all the time. That's a big one, isn't it? The need to challenge generalizations that are made. And this is what leads us from the realm of certainty, which is closed, to the realm of possibility, which is open. And then he finishes all of that by saying, are you actually willing to have your mind changed? You know, when was the last time we got into a conversation, we didn't agree with what's being said, but we were willing to have our mind changed? I can't say I do that very often. I try, but I don't do that very often. So that's the realm of agreement and disagreement, and making that a more conscious exploration. The next area I'm going to talk about in this book is the area of listening, of responding, of questions. He says that an important aspect of listening is to ask a question. When you ask a question, you are, as it were, creating an explanation. you are requesting validity in what's being said. You are getting clarification on someone's values. I mean, where are they coming from? Why are they saying this? Instead of that's wrong, I'm right. It's an investigation to understand more. This is beautiful, right? And what's beautiful? Beautiful is creating conversations that are both interesting and enjoyable, as opposed to a conversation where only one person's talking and the other person just letting them do it, right? I'm forgetting which of the chapters this was in, because the chapters are grouped on subjects like listening and responding and questions and so on. But I was reminded of the what if question. A question starting with the word what if is a very interesting one, because it is impossible for the brain not to answer that question. Like, for example, I speak to a lot of people, adults my age, older, younger, that are not used to enjoying themselves, having fun. You ask them, what's fun for you? And they don't have an answer. So just by asking, well, what if you did know? What if you did know what was fun for you, for example, the brain's already racing to answer that question, because the brain cannot help but at least look for an answer. So it's what if questions. The importance of asking questions is we get clarification. He also reminds, there's also a reminder in there about not wasting energy in arguing across purposes. That's a really important one. It is such a waste of energy to do that. Right, the next area is about the 6 hats. This is a really interesting book, by the way, because he's done a whole book on the 6 hats. What do I mean by 6 hats? You ever get a bunch of people together to talk about something, to create something, to find answers, or the typical types of meetings that happen at work, right? You know, let's say you've got 10 people, they're all there for different reasons, they're all there with different inclinations, and it's really just going to be a melee of stuff that happens until people arrive at solutions from obligations, right? It's a mess, isn't it? So I think this is about 20, 30 years ago, he came up with the 6 hats, or maybe the 80s, forgive me. He came up with the 6 hats model. And this is something that's done in schools and institutions. Edward De Bono, he's legit. I think he taught at a steel company, and in one afternoon was able to basically facilitate 21,000 different 21,000 different ideas through all the people there. 21,000. Okay, this guy is good. This guy is good. Anyway, the 6 hats. I'll just briefly tell you what they are for what it's worth. We've got the white hat, which is focusing on information and what do we need, what are we going to do, okay? The red hat, as it were, that focuses on emotions and feelings behind something. We've got the black hat, which focuses on criticism and what's wrong, right? You've got to know what's wrong to get to know what's right. The yellow hat is about the how, it's about the values and so on. You've got the green hat, which is about creative effort. I'll explain this in a minute. And the blue hat, which you start with and you finish with, which is about setting up the focus and the outcome. So what this looks like in practice is you'll get a group of people and they'll all, as it were, put on a hat. Okay, I'm doing the fingers thing, putting on the hat, and they'll all do that. So you don't have, let's say, 10 people at cross purpose. You got 10 people with the same focus and the same the same intention, the same inclination. And so they'll think together with the blue hat for a minute. Then they'll think together with the white hat on the what's and so on for a minute. They'll think together with the green hat creatively for a minute. And everything that I've heard about this, when it's actually applied, is it's very, very effective. So that's the 6 hats technique, model as it were. and that's an equal part of this book too. All right, nearly there, nearly there. So the next couple of chapters I'm going to just lump together in here about concepts and attitudes. And do forgive me, I am going to skip big parts of this book because it would just be too much to get into in this way. He's talking about concepts because conversations are full of them. We don't necessarily know it, we're not necessarily looking for them, but they're there. And there are different layers of them and different levels of them. I'll give you an example, as best I can. You've probably been into a bookstore or something like that that sells coffee. You can go get a coffee there. And you might have seen it, you might have seen on a board the words, we proudly serve Starbucks coffee here. You might have seen that before. So that's just an example where you've got several different concepts all wrapped up in a few words. You've got the brand concept, okay, like, oh, I like Starbucks. I'll have a coffee here. You've got the challenge of the concept that a company needs to have its own premises. You've got the challenge of the concept that a company needs to have its own employees, because there's no commercial license to do that. There's no employee contracts to do that. It's the brand itself that's I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but you see what I mean by concepts in themselves. Then there's attitudes, and this I found very interesting. This I found very interesting because a conversation, a meeting, it's not just an exchange of ideas. It's the people behind the ideas. It's the minds behind the ideas, isn't it? And so he actually gives names to some of these ideas, names to some of these attitudes, because attitudes are all a function of self-image, and humans are a funny species, aren't they? Because sometimes we are very invested in protecting that self-image over the benefit of the exchange. And so I'll just share some of these attitudes, as it were. We've got the guardian of values. we've got the person that likes to play dumb. The person, and he calls it we've got the who cares person that doesn't care about the conversation. We've got the explorer. We've got the innovator. We've got the bully. We've got the toady. All these different people. I found this interesting because I don't super enjoy some social situations, because I just don't like to weave my way through these attitudes. I like to just share very openly, instead of having to piecemeal my way through how someone wants to put themselves across. I just feel it gets in the way. But that and concepts is given a good amount of time in the book, and it's worth knowing that. This book is really about empathy. It's about humility. It's about holding one's own space and allowing other people to do the same. The last chapter I'm going to talk about in this book is the chapter is called Alternatives. And I feel like this is the heart and soul of the book. Because a work like this, How to Have a Beautiful Mind, it's about finding possibilities, refining a possibility into a certainty. And he even says, the seeking of alternatives is beautiful. I love that. And without that, without seeking alternatives, you just have rigidity and you have complacency, don't you? And even beyond that, you may have a solution, but you can have a better solution. He's Edward De Bono's even work in consultancy. That's changed national legislation. This guy really is legit. So I'm going to just I'm going to just start to wrap this up now. There's a lot of ideas in here. So as I read it and as I'm conveying to you now, I feel that uniqueness is a big part of what this book is about. Uniqueness, empathy for people listening to you, and empathy for people that are talking to you, and the humility to listen to them, the humility to put your own agenda aside and allow a collaboration, even for a minute or two. It's a self-awareness and a self-regulation to let that happen, and give people that respect. I honestly would say in every chapter of this book there is something that could, I want to say, transform your life, but that's a bit feels a bit cliche to say that. There is something in every chapter of this book that could make your life significantly better, insofar as you're able to communicate yourself better, be heard better, that sort of thing. He and this book are not without criticism. You know, I was looking into, I was reading what other people were saying about this book the other day, and I tell you, there is no middle opinion on this book. People either love it or they hate it, and those that don't like it, they find it clinical. I've got to say, his writing is a bit clinical. They find him clinical. They call him pseudo-intellectual, and I'm like, a lot of what he says lands. That's all I can say. That's all I can say. Yeah. So, there's a lot in there. I've done my best with that. How to Have a Beautiful Mind by Edward De Bono. I really recommend you check him out, if not this book. And with that, I'll say thank you for listening to me, and good night.